I first just apologize for my voice?
No problem. We'll keep the mic close.
If it stops, you'll be ready to start singing, yes? Okay. Climate Stewards, we're the climate project of our parent organization, which is Arosha International, which is a Christian conservation charity working in about 18 countries around the world. That includes America and North and South, the United States, Canada, but also many European countries, but also African countries, South America, the Lebanon, India. And we're a family of very local grassroots community projects doing local things that are very relevant to the local people. In India, it's how to keep the elephants out of the local farmers' stuff. In London, it's what to do with the wasteland. How do you turn that back into a good piece of land? And so we're doing community projects around the world. About 3 years ago, we suddenly realized that we weren't doing anything specifically about the climate, and yet that was what people were beginning to ask us about. So we set up Climate Stewards to act as the resource for all those who ask us about the climate. What should we be doing? And that's we've gone on from there, trying to provide an answer, particularly to Christians. What should we be doing about the climate?
So is your organization focused solely on Christians, or is it wider than that? I've often wondered, there are many organizations that do similar types of work as yours that are non-denominational, that are not religious at all, and there are many other organizations that are religious. What's the difference?
It's unusual to find one that straddles that divide, we're Christian in the sense that what we're doing because we're Christian. It's coming out of our Christianity. It's coming out of our beliefs. We see that this is God's world. He made it. He values it. He loves it, and as such, it needs to be looked after. It's a good thing to be looked after, and it seems obvious that Christians should be doing that. But our concern for biodiversity, for nature, is real. I mean, it's because we think it's real, and so the projects are genuine. They do good science. They do good science on the ground, and they look after the local people in the same sort of way. And it seems to us the most natural thing that those two things should be combined. Most people act on the basis of their convictions, on the basis of their values. We're a group of people who happen to have Christian values, and we're acting on those convictions.
How did you personally come to be doing this sort of work, this sort of development work based in your values?
Okay. I knew the founder of Arosha when I was at university with him a long time ago. Very good friend. And we had this long conversation over many years as to what the priorities were for Christians. Was it God's creation we should be looking after, and as a follow-on from that, looking after people? Or was it the other way around? Should we be looking after people, particularly those who are poor, and as a follow-on from that, looking after creation? And when the issue of climate change came up, then that brought those two issues together. And it was at that point that I said I would love to come and work with Arosha to help set up their climate initiative. My wife worked voluntarily to set that up for the first year, along with another colleague, and then I came in about 2 years ago as the full-time director.
So Climate Stewards runs projects around the world that tackle climate change in one way or another. Can you talk about some of those projects and what you've seen around the world with your projects? Yeah,
we plant trees in Ghana, and on a number of small sites. They're not huge projects, but they're planting trees to sequester carbon, but also to help the local communities in terms of employment, in terms of securing their land, because land with trees on it doesn't get washed away when there's a flood. To provide shelter and shade from the sun and from the wind. And between the trees, we plant the trees 5 meters apart. Between the trees you can plant small-scale food crops as well. So it's good for the planet in that you're growing trees which absorb carbon, but also it's good for the local people because their land is improved. It improves their food security. It's also, if you plant the right trees, then it's good for the local biodiversity, the local wildlife. They like to live in the trees. The more trees, the more space they have to live. So we're doing that in Ghana. It's a difficult place to run a project because the roads are bad, the communications are bad. It's difficult to find people with the skills to help you run the project. But those are the kind of places where it's really important to run that kind of project. You can do it easily in China or Brazil, where the skills and the communications are good. But the places like Ghana and really, upcountry Ghana, that's where it's really needed, where people need the help to adapt to climate change. We're working in Peru as well, and a little bit in South Africa, maybe Kenya to come.
I'll remind everyone this is an interactive session. You can put your questions or comments at oneclimate.net into the text chat box, or you can use the Twitter hashtag #OneClimate. Anuradha, do we have anything on Twitter right now?
Yes, there are various issues that are coming up, but one is quite a challenging issue, I think. And Brendan, I know that you deal with this kind of challenge, which is some Christians obviously feel the sort of the nicer end of them, if you like, feel that we don't need to do anything because God will solve it after all.
And it seems to me that although Jesus said the poor will always be with us, he also told us to look after the poor. And one of the things that we were told about creation is God has said, I've put you here, but he says look after it. I mean, that's one of the key messages of Genesis. He says look after it. So that's why we're called climate stewards. Stewards meaning to look after. Climate care is not a religion. There are many people for whom it's a big thing. But we don't come at it from a religious point of view. We're coming at it from, as Christians, saying this is a consequence of our Christianity. That the two great commandments that Jesus gave us were to love God and to love our neighbour, particularly those who are in trouble and wherever they are. And we understand that this world is made by God, and that he continues to sustain it. It actually says that Jesus sustains creation, not just set up and went away. If we act in a way that damages it, we're acting actually actively against what God is doing even now. And that doesn't seem to be a very good way of showing love for God. So here's this big commandment, love God, and that's part of that is to share his concerns, to take on board the responsibilities he's actually given us, which is to care for the world around us. In terms of our neighbours, if it's true that the way we're living, the ordinary way we're living, is making life very difficult for our brothers and sisters around the world, then that actually is that has impact on how I'm obeying the commandment to love my neighbour. If the way I live hurts my neighbour, then I've got to do something about that. So we feel that as Christians, this is coming out of our Christianity. It's entirely consistent with it. If you go back 30 years, 40 years, Christians were so concerned about the spiritual aspects of what they believed that they'd forgotten to care about the poor largely around the world. Now that's not an issue. Everybody knows. World Vision, Tear Fund, Compassion, they all know that these are big Christian organizations that exist to care for the poor. They're doing it because they're Christians. Suddenly the same organizations actually are waking up to say we should care about the climate as well because it impacts the poor.
Anuradha, what are our viewers saying about this?
There's a question here, could religion in fact play a big part in motivating people to act on climate change?
I think that's huge. I think it's massive. And in fact, I think it's almost the most important thing we do. The projects that we do in Ghana, if you actually add them up, we've got 100 hectares now. It's tiny. And when we've finished in Ghana, we'll have maybe 1,000 hectares. In terms of the long-term big impact on the world, it's small. It's not going to make the difference. But we're interested in the impact it has on those who give to us, because they're mostly funded by lots of small donors who give to us in a sort of voluntary offsetting way. But it's the impact that it has on them in changing their minds, in gradually working out that this is an issue that they should do more about. And it's something that they can tell their friends about. If climate change, if sorting out the climate is something we do as individuals and it's private, then we don't make any progress. But the big progress is made as we become enthusiasts about this to tell our friends, and as they tell their friends. And the projects are important because they act as a sort of a touchstone that people can support and can tell their friends about.